wouldn't it be finished by now if I hadn't chosen to double knit it? Yes. Yes, it probably would be. Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Izzy from Izzy Knits. This is my first ever YouTube video. I have been around Instagram and TikTok for quite a while doing my little knits, but I thought it was finally time to create a YouTube so I can sort of speak in a little bit more detail about my projects and do some tutorials and bits like that. So if that sounds interesting to you, then please subscribe and like this video and let's get into it. So I thought I'd start off strong with what's kind of become my flagship project, and I say that because every time I post about it, it gets a ton of interest and a ton of questions about it, which I love. We love the attention. Let's just go through what it is, how I'm doing it, how you, if you're interested in doing a similar project, how you might do it too. This is the pattern and it's absolutely massive, so you're going to struggle to fit it on the screen, but this is she. This is a cross stitch pattern. It is by Long Dog Samplers. If you're not a cross stitcher, you probably are unfamiliar with Long Dog Samplers. They are a set of cross stitch designs designed by Jules Line at Jules Line on Instagram, and they are just absolutely stunning. I mean, you can see from this one, right? Like, just absolutely gorgeous. So this is from the mono range, where all of the designs are 2 colors, which is great for knitting, really. Just makes it a lot easier. But yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, you can see in this one is chest themed, but there's a lot of dragons, there's a lot of animals, there's a lot of knights. It's kind of got this sort of medieval / fantasy vibe, so if that's sort of your aesthetic or something that you're interested in, would highly recommend going to have a look at those patterns. I am by no means claiming that I'm the only person in the world or the first person in the world to knit a cross stitch pattern. I know for a fact that I'm not, because I've seen other people do it, but it is something that seems to intrigue a lot of people, and maybe something that people don't think is a possible thing or think is a unduly complicated process, which I have figured out that it's not. So we'll talk a little bit about how I go about it. So this, as you can see, I've knitted reversibly. So one side, 2 sides. It is both, it's knit stitches on both sides. That is done with a technique called double knitting, which is essentially when you're working both sides at the same time. I am going to do a separate double knitting tutorial because I did that on my TikTok and people said it was quite helpful, because it is a technique that looks a lot more complicated than it is. It is really, really simple. It is essentially just knitting and purling. I mean, it's not even essentially just knitting and purling. It is, for a fact, just knitting and purling. And it's super suitable for beginners, which I didn't think as a beginner. I mean, I only started double knitting when I've been knitting for about 3 years, thinking it was super complicated, and it is so easy. So if that's something that you're interested in, please stay tuned for a future video where I will teach you all about double knitting, and then you can create your own little double-sided things too. But why did I do it double knitting? Other than the fact that it's obviously like very cool, which it actually holds a lot of weight. That's a lot of the reason why I did it, because it was very cool. But I did it because at the time I was a bit worried when I looked at this pattern. I was a little bit worried about how my tension would be on it if I knit it single-sided. So another way you could do this, and I've seen other people knit cross-stitch patterns this way, is knitting it just stranded colourwork style. So this jumper that I'm wearing right now is knitted stranded colourwork. So often in a stranded colourwork pattern, the colours will appear with enough regularity that you can quite easily just carry the yarn across. So in this one, you know, I've been carrying the white across and then the blue across and bits like that. It's very simply done. Occasionally have to catch a float, but in general, it's quite sort of straightforward. Whereas something like this, because of those big spaces, like you can just see those big white spaces there, you'd be catching a lot of floats, which hopefully that makes sense to most people. I assume most people who are watching this are knitters as well, but essentially it means you just have to be carrying the colour across the back, which you have to be quite careful about your tension with, because if you pull the tension too tight at the back, you're going to get a puckering effect. Most colourwork knitters will have experienced this at some point, and it is just very frustrating, especially when you put a lot of time and effort into something, for it to not come out exactly as you want it to be is, I don't want to be dramatic and say it's devastating, but it's somewhere along that line. But that's why I did double knitting, because I wanted to get a really lovely even tension. And what I will say is, as much as this is a mammoth task and as exhausting as it has been, the tension is exemplary. So I'm just going to try and show it to you. I mean, it's very good, I'm not going to lie, and on both sides too. So it's just, It's just very nice. It's even. The texture of it, like, it's very, very thick now because obviously it's two sides of yarn, and it's really squishy and lovely. And I honestly couldn't be any happier with it, even though it does take a really, really long time. Another thing about double knitting and that method of going about it is that because you're knitting both sides at once, you are casting on twice the amount of stitches. As I said, I'm not going to get into the technical process of double knitting a garment. I'm going to do that separately, but it is a lot of stitches to take account of. So this pattern that I'm doing right now is 170 stitches across. That's the cross stitch pattern. So I'm obviously working across 340 stitches because it's 2 for every stitch. Whatever cross stitch pattern you choose might have more, might have less. Less is obviously better, a bit easier, but even if it's got the same amount or more, you can still do it the process that I've been doing it. So I'll show you how I've done that. So I got this design off the Long Dog Sampler website, and when you do, you get a pack of paper. I have got with this piece 9 cross stitch charts. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's how it works. So I've been working them together in groups of 3. So those 3 pieces I worked together, completed that now because I'm halfway through. This 3 pieces I'm currently working through, and these 3 I've still got to do. Here is an example of the chart. So I've literally just got it there, I've had it printed out, and just as I go through it, I'm literally just like, crossing out the stitches that I've done on it, which seems like a super rudimentary way to do it. It's almost so obvious, there's no point saying it, but just to say, it actually is really easy to follow when you're doing it like that. I know people kind of look at it and they just think, oh my gosh, that's mammoth, like how could I'm just going to lose count on my stitches and stuff, and you definitely would if you were just trying to do it like off the top of your head, but you just do it like this. I just keep it super regimented, and I think if you're used to knitting as well, if you're used to knitting colour work, this is not going to be anything new to you. You're always going to have ways of sort of keeping track of it and just checking that you're on track as you go. I will say I haven't made any massive mistakes as I've gone with it, which is quite surprising because I always make mistakes. Which is one thing I will say about this type of project, is if you do have to go back while you're double knitting a project, it is a bit of a nightmare because it's so easy to twist your stitches, which is fine. If you know that you've twisted your stitches, you can kind of go back and do them. But often, as I've done early stages of this project, I've twisted almost a whole row, and I didn't realise that I had done that. So you're probably going to be the only person who notices that about your own work, but like, it's just a little bit frustrating. The yarn I've used. This is Cedar Hayfield Bonus Aran. I think that's what it's called. I might be putting too many letters in it there. And these come in 400 gram balls. I'm halfway through and I've still not finished the first balls that I've got. So, I mean, it's a really inexpensive yarn. So this was £10 per ball. They come in 400 gram balls, and it is an acrylic wool mix. So it's 80% acrylic, 20% wool. I really, really love it. I think it's really nice yarn. It's quite hard wearing, which you want because this is obviously going to be a blanket or a wall tapestry. I personally wouldn't use wool for that. And also, I will say that this is quite a predictable yarn, by which I mean it doesn't... Sometimes when you work with a yarn, you realise that it gets quite heavy as it goes, and it will start stretching out or it starts behaving in a strange way, whereas I have always had really good experience with this yarn. It never stretches on me. It's always very good. If you're using it for garments, it's machine washable. To be clear, Cedar are paying me no money to give this glowing review of their yarn, but it's really good. I really, really like it. And a lot of other brands do an alternative version of the same thing. So these 400 gram balls, 80% acrylic, 20% wool. I think King Cole does one. I think other brands do them. So yeah, if you see anything like that, that's good. Or in fact, you could use whatever yarn you wanted for this type of work, but that is what I would do. In terms of needles, I've used a long circular needle. So this is a 120 centimeter needle with a 4mm width or thickness, I suppose. I would say, so I'm using Aran weight wool. 4mm is usually probably quite a narrow needle to use for Aran. It's just a little bit on the smaller side. But obviously you want it to have quite a nice close-knit texture. That's what I wanted for this. So the 4 has done really well with me in that respect. Another question people have asked is how big it's going to be. And I don't really know. Fortunately, because it's not an item of clothing, I'm kind of like, I don't really care how big it's going to end up to be. I haven't really got measurements in mind. But I will say, in terms of width, width at the moment, it's 120 centimeters, as I said, matching the needle. There's a little bit, it will probably stretch a little bit more when that comes off, just because I'm bunching it together just a tad. So it'll be about that. And then in terms of height, it's currently 62 centimeters, and that's halfway through. So by that logic, for height, it's probably going to be about 124. So it's going to be more or less a square. It's quite funny when you look at the original, what it's supposed to look like. It's quite a tall rectangle, which goes to another question that I'm asked, which is, okay, but if you're knitting a cross stitch pattern, is it going to look different in the end? And the answer to that is yes, because knit stitches are a little bit more of a rectangle, whereas a cross stitch is going to be more of a square. So yes, the pattern itself is going to be a little bit squished, which I think is more of a problem for people who are used to cross stitch, because if you're a knitter, you're probably used to that anyway in your work, and you probably won't see it. Like for me, if I look at that, right, that doesn't look squished to me. That just looks like normal proportions. And I'm sure that there's cross stitchers or people with better spatial awareness, I don't know, better shape awareness, who will look at that and be like, that is comically squished. But I don't know. She's perfect to me. Do with that what you will. I mean, you could always try and elongate the pattern to make up the difference, but I personally think that could end up being a nightmare. So I wouldn't bother doing that myself. Another question I'm asked is why did I decide to do this in the first place? Where did this idea come from? So I wanted to knit a blanket, but I knew it was going to be a massive undertaking. And so I wanted something that I felt really passionate about and that I was willing to invest the time in, because knitting obviously takes a long time. Blankets are massive. So I was thinking this is going to take me months, if not up to a year, if not years. So I don't like to think about that, because that's just a kind of sad thought. But I knew it was going to take me a really, really long time. So I wanted something that I'd be really passionate about. And I was looking on Ravelry and I wasn't really finding anything that was like suiting my very specific specifications. I also wanted it to be 2-color, but highly specific. And then I was on Pinterest, I think, which isn't very like me, but I came across one of the Long Dog samplers. It wasn't actually this one, it was another one. And I thought, oh my gosh, that looks really, really beautiful. Didn't realise at the time it was a cross stitch pattern. I don't really know what I thought it was. But anyway, then I started to look into it and I thought, well, it just looks like a knit colour chart to me. So I'm sure we could have a go at knitting it. And here we are now. So if you've seen some fun little cross stitch patterns that you'd be interested in doing, then please take this as a proof of concept that it is possible to do, and it's actually very, very straightforward to do. It's exactly as straightforward as you think it is. So just go ahead and knit it up. I wanted to give a specific shout out to the Long Dog Sampler community. As I mentioned, the designer is Jules Line, and she very kindly reached out to me when she saw my knit version of the same, and she is absolutely, I mean, she's so inspirational as a designer, but she's also just so lovely, and she very kindly shared it on the Long Dog Samplers Facebook page, which is a really, really magical place. And I will say, obviously I love the knit community, that's like my community, but the cross-stitch community, or at least the Long Dog Sampler community, is the nicest people I've ever met in my life. They were so lovely and so supportive, and I had so many really, really lovely comments. I couldn't help but get a little bit big-headed after the comments, because they were like, oh, this is amazing, you're so clever. Like, this is amazing, I'm so clever. So I would highly recommend following that page if you like this sort of design, if you are in fact a cross stitcher, or if you're like me, a knitter who is sort of taking on the cross stitch things. But also off the back of that, I know a lot of people in the Long Dog Sampler community have now undertaken their own knit Long Dog samplers, which I love to see. So there's quite a few of us now, and I think we're all making slow but steady progress on our blankets, tapestries, whatever people are planning to do with it when they finish it. At least one of them has also done it single-sided, so that's also obviously an option. I think in future I might try and do one single-sided as well. As much as I love it being a double knitted one, I would quite like to see how it works single-sided, and then that might also open up an opportunity to do maybe a slightly more complex design. As you can see, I'm quite an ambitious knitter, so I'm always just trying to sort of push the boat of what is possible, which is good in some ways, but it's also a bit of a headache, and things don't always go to plan, but so be it. So I think those are all the things that are springing to mind at this stage. As I say, we're halfway through. I started it last September. It's been almost a whole year. Oh God. But hopefully I can speed up a little bit and have it done by the end of this year. time will tell whether that actually happens. But in the meantime, I'm loving seeing everyone else's projects. If you're thinking of doing a similar project, a long dog sampler or any cross stitch, please, I would urge you to give it a go. And I'd love to see what your result is and how you get on with it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I would love it if you could subscribe and like this video. And if you've got any questions, please put them below in the comments. And hopefully I'll see you very soon.